Hi, Britt Davenport coming to you from Lewiston, Idaho. Today we're going to be tying a Beetle Bug Palmer, which is a trout fly. It is a dry fly. Our cutthroat here in Idaho seem to really enjoy it. It's a high floater, so it's great for fast pocket water, and it just looks really nice and it's fun to tie. And let's get started. So today I'll be tying on a Daiichi 1180 size 12, which is just a standard dry fly hook. So I'm going to start by pinching the barb on my hook. Our trout rivers here are all barbless, so it just makes sense to pinch the barb first, then you don't have to worry about it. If for some reason if you were to tie the fly first and then pinch the barb and the hook break, then you've wasted all that time tying the pattern. So it's just best to start that, just get in the habit of it if your waters you regularly fish are barbless. So we'll start by putting our hook in the vise. We want that shank to be coming off just the top of our jaws. That way it spins as close to center as we can get it. For today, I'm using Semperfli 18-aught Nano Silk in white. And to start, if you haven't used Nano Silk yet, it's a little slippery, so I'm just gonna run a little bit of this GSP wax over it just to help us get it started. We'll start by dressing our hook shank. Now the tail of this pattern is moose, so I'm going to cut a chunk of that off. A chunk of that cut off. I've cut off more than I know I'll need because I know as I clean it out, it's going to trim that down quite a bit. So you can pull it, what you can out with your fingers. You can use a comb such as the Stonfo, whatever you have handy. I like to pull any short ones out. I'm a little anal as far as it goes, so if there's any that are an off color, I pull those out too. Now you don't have to stack them, I prefer to. I think it just looks like a neater fly, so I've put them in my hair stacker. To be honest, the fish don't care, so if you stack them, great. If you don't, that's okay too. And so now we want our tail to be about equal to the length of our hook shank, so we're going to take just a quick measurement. I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit more wax on that just to help it grab onto our material. Just going to take a few wraps, making sure to keep that on the top of our hook shank. And then as I go back just a little, I'm going to take a few looser, just gathering wraps so as to not flare that hair out too badly. Going to lift that up, advance our thread forward a little, and I'm just going to work this moose right into the body of the fly. Now we'll also be tying in wings, so keep that in mind. I'm only going to take this about halfway up the hook shank. And then I'm going to cut it off just at a slight angle. And we're just going to bind those fibers down. The nice thing about the Nano Silk is it really doesn't build up hardly any bulk at all on your fly. For the next material, we're going to be tying in the wing, which is white calf tail, or excuse me, white calf body. You can also use calf tail, it's up to you. Calf tail is, albeit definitely a little bit easier to work with than the body hair. If you use the body hair, just make sure you have some that has some length to it, and that'll make it a lot easier to work with. It is pretty slippery though, so keep that in mind. So I cut a chunk of that off of the hide. Again, I'm going to go through and pull out any of the under fur, any short fibers that we can get our hands on. And then I'm again going to put that in my hair stacker. And we're going to go ahead and even those tips up. So nice and even. I'm going to actually grab that with my right hand and then make that transfer. Now, to take a measurement for the wings, you also want them to be about the length of the hook shank. So go ahead and take a measurement. I want to make sure your thread is at about the 1/3 point, maybe slightly to the rear of that. I'm going to go ahead and just put some more wax on that so it gets a good bite on our materials. And then we're just going to do... Also, if you spin your thread counterclockwise, it'll have a tendency to jump to the rear of your hook. And it helps to grab that material a little bit. So got that bound down nice and tight. I'm going to lift that front up. I'm going to make a bit of a thread dam in front of those wings, which this is where with nano silk it's so fine that takes a little bit. Make just a bit of a thread dam there, just to help prop those up. I'm going to come into the rear here and cut these butt sections off, and you want to cut them, if you can, at an angle so that they blend nicely into that mousse. If you have any strays, don't worry about it. That's what we have scissors for. I'm gonna jump my thread behind and just wrap those butt sections down. So I've pretty much just made those two materials meet in the rear of the fly. We're going to be dubbing the body, so it doesn't have to be perfect as far as bumps and whatnot go. If you were using a biot or something like that for a body material, you would need to make sure it was much neater and much skinnier. Or not skinnier, I guess that's probably not the word, but just a much neater taper. But we'll be dubbing it, so that's not too terribly important. I'm going to take some more wraps in front of this, try to get that dam built back up. Again, this is where, I mean, the nano silk is great that it doesn't build up wraps, but every now and then you do need some thread wraps, so it does take a little bit more. I've also got a little stray hair right there, so I'm going to trim that out of the way. So we have that wing propped up. So our next thing is going to be to split that wing. So this has a wolf style wing. So I'm gonna tighten my tension hub nut a little bit on the vise and spin it towards me. I found that's just easiest, and I'm looking kind of top down in a way. I'm going to just use my fingers to split them in half as best I can and take some wraps. And then go around the hook shank. And then take wraps the other direction in between and around the hook shank. Got a few that are kind of going willy-nilly, so I'm just going to get rid of those right now. So now you can see we have them divided, but I like to post them just a little bit. It just kind of pulls that material together a little bit better. You could leave them that way if you like. So I'm going to now, again, tilt the vise towards me a little bit. I just find it to be a little bit easier if the vise is tilted towards me. And I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to do the one nearest to me first. I'm just going to take a few loose wraps around that wing and then go around the hook shank. I'll just do that a couple times. And then I'm going to just tilt it towards me a little bit further, and I'll do that same exact thing to the other wing. You have to be real careful here. If you have too much tension, it'll just pull it right off the wing. So now we've got two nicely separated wings. Some folks at this point will add a drop of head cement or lacquer just to lock those in place, you can certainly do that. I'm just going to put just a drop of Solarized Bone Dry there, just to make sure that they're where they're at and they're not going to tilt. If they're not centered properly, then your fly won't float right. It'll tilt to one side or the other. Now is a good time as well. If you have any stragglers, just go in and trim them out. I've started using these spring scissors from Anadromous Fly Co, and they're really great for just getting into these little tight places to trim out. And if you have any in the actual wings that they're kind of going haywire, trim them out. That's what we have scissors for, honestly, and that's all for you because the fish isn't going to care. So we're going to take our thread back to the rear of the hook. Now the hackles on this, we have two different hackles. We have so this is a size 12 hook. We're going to use the size 14 and a size 12 hackle. The size 14, so one size smaller, is going to be for the body of the fly. And then the size 12, so the appropriately sized hackle for the hook, will be the front third of the fly. So I've gone through all of my brown, and we're using brown, gone through all of our hackles and found two appropriately sized feathers. I like to trim it a little bit just so that way I've got a good tie-in point, and then I'll also remove just a few of those barbs on that top side. That way when I take those first straps, it's just neater. They won't be going any to the rear as much. So I'm going to just tie that in. I'm going to just take this feather for now and just stick it down in between the jaws, if it'll cooperate, just to keep it out of our way a little bit. So for the dubbing, I'm going to put a half hitch in right there just to save our spot. For the dubbing I'm using, it's called Minnow Gill. So it's going to be this red one here. It's the SLF Whitlock's Dubbing Blend number 2 in Minnow Gills. You can use red, you can use whatever dubbing you prefer. I really enjoy this red minnow gill. It just seems to look really nice, and our fish here have responded really well to it, but just plain red dubbing is just fine. So I'm going to take my thread over to the thread post, and then dubbing it this way is a little bit difficult with those wings, but we're going to give it a try. So I've loosened my tension nut. I'm just going to grab that on. And I'm pretty sure we're going to need a little bit more than that, so we'll just keep going. About that. So I'm going to take my bobbin off of my thread post, and then I'm going to just start dubbing that body. So I like to have my tension nut down a little bit. It just gives me a little bit more control, especially at the rear of the fly, where I'm trying to work it in and out of that hook point. Nano silk is amazingly strong, but your hook point will cut it. So I'm just going to work this all the way up. We're going to go just to behind those wings. Just keep in mind we're going to be tying a hackle in this front part of the fly. So I'm going to go ahead and put a half hitch in. Now this feather is long enough, I really don't need hackle pliers for it, but if you wanted, you certainly could use that. I'm going to take fairly close wraps, not touching, but close, because this is going to be a very buoyant fly that we want to fish into the rough pocket water. I'm going to take that up just to where our dubbing ends. I'm going to take a couple wraps to secure that hackle down, and then a few in front. I'm just going to go in and trim that out. So the only thing left now is to use our size 12 feather. So go same color. You could use a different color if you wanted. I haven't played a whole lot with variations of this. I think you could do a lot with it. But honestly, how it is works just great with our local fish. So why try to fix something that isn't broke? But I do think you could do a lot with the varying colors and materials with it. Okay, so I've prepped this feather just like I did the other one. I'm going to tie that in. I like to start it. It's hard to not get your wings in the way, but I'll get it kind of started there in front of the wings. And by doing that, gives you a really good bite. And go behind the wings and then bring our thread back up to the front. I'm just going to go in and put a half hitch in and then take our thread over to our thread post. Again, this feather's a pretty long one, so I don't need hackle pliers. If it's a shorter feather, now would be the time to grab your hackle pliers. I'm going to take a number of wraps behind those wings, and then a number of wraps in front of them. And keep in mind, this is going to be fished in really rough water, so I tend to hackle them quite a bit. So a number of hackle wraps there. Once you feel like you've got enough, go ahead and just take a few wraps behind, and then pull everything back, take a few wraps in front of it, and then go ahead and just trim that feather out. At this point, I like to pull everything back. I'm gonna go ahead and put just a little wax on the thread, just so we get some good wraps that grab. I'm gonna go in, and again with nano silk, building up a head is a little bit difficult because it just doesn't build up, which is what makes it so great. But I'm just gonna go ahead, build a little head up. Just put a smidge more wax on it. And then for this, rather than whip finishing it, I'm just going to use a half hitch tool. So I'm just gonna put a few half hitches on it there. This is a great way to finish a fly when you've got a lot of hackle up front and you're afraid to, if you whip finish, you might mash some of that hackle down, whatnot. So this is a great way to do that without fear of cutting your hackles off or mashing them down, excuse me. So now we can go in, use our brush to kind of make sure those hackles are all standing up. And if you want, you can leave it at that point, or you can go in and just put a drop of head cement or bone dry, whatever you'd like. If you do that and you find that you did get some in the tip or in the eye of the hook, if you take just the tip of one of your feathers, so just have the tip, I mean, I broke that off, but usually we all have little bits left over. You can go through and just run that right through the eye. And it'll clean that head cement out. And then we'll just hit that with the UV real quick. And there you have it. We have a Beetle Bug Palmer. The cutthroat in central Idaho absolutely love that pattern. So there it is. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.